Hi, I'm Michael Mattesi, author of the Force figure drawing books, and this is the third installment of the Force videos. Very quickly again, I'm drawing on a Strathmore smooth newsprint. Very important that it's smooth because we're after fluidity and energy. And you'll also see me using this Strathmore layout bond, just excellent level of opacity, so you can see what's on top and what's underneath at the same time. So let's get started. I have a great deal to cover in this video. Quick recap, where we left off in the last video was rhythm. And rhythm is very important. It's finally the glue that occurs when you deal with directional force and applied force, right? So we talked about that in the video, and then I believe I closed the video. With what I call skating the page, and I sort of very quickly walked you through that process, but it's about, what I didn't mention in that video that I want to just really quickly mention here, it's about physicality. It's the fact that when you're drawing and you're looking at something, that you have a sense of the physicality of the thing that you're drawing. It is not just a dead object, unless it is a dead object. But if it's not, and it's someone or something that's alive, go for its life, otherwise why draw it? Go draw a rock, if you're drawing something alive, go after its life, that's what is the most important thing about that. So what I'm trying to instruct is, how do I do that? This guy's telling me to draw the life of something, and the way to do that is through this concept of force. So all right, skating the page, physicality. We're going to talk about forceful form. All right, we're going to talk about forceful form. So we're finally leaving force. Forceful form is the next step. I just call it force form here. All right. Whew, I don't even know where to start with this. It's just so big. Let's grab a drawing. All right, so here's one of my drawings, and what I want you to see in it is it has force, right? There's a lot of fluidity in it based off of the stuff we discussed in the prior videos. Let me get this on camera here for you. All right, it has all this force, right? And the force in this is sweeping this way, all right? But notice what else I started doing here. Instead of it just being these lines, for instance, here I'm sort of traveling the spine. Here's the model's rib cage. I started, especially down here, I started taking force and moving it across the surface of the model's back, the surface of the model's skin, right? Let me move this so you can see even better. You see right there, right? In a way, I'm sculpting, right? I'm sculpting the surface of the body, and I'm doing that in the direction that force is moving, right? And that's really the key. That's the key to all of this, right? If I did that same drawing, and I had the force of the back like so, right? And I'm moving along like this. And then I said, what, I need to sculpt, I need to figure out the structure there. And I started doing this. Doesn't really work very well there. I am talking about its roundness, but that roundness, going back to the car analogy, right? That roundness is like roadblock, 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 roadblock. I'm going to stop the idea of force, and that's the last thing you want to do. One of the challenges of drawing with the concept of force is, how do I keep its flow open and moving constantly? So anyway, you want to be careful that you are not putting down lines to describe form that are perpendicular to the force itself. If you look here, there's lines here also, right, that are describing form, right? So here's the back again, and they're over here. I'm going to start drawing them. But look at what they're doing. It may look like they're perpendicular down there to this, but they're not, because if I were to continue them, they would basically sweep their way up like so. So you see what happens is, as force comes down here, it basically, hooks up into the structure of the bottom of the rib cage here. Okay? So that's what's going on there. So this is one way to go about it. There's sort of two processes to drawing the way I see it. One is your eye. Right? You have an amazing eye, and what does that mean? You have an amazing eye. Here's your eyeball, right? That nice big eyeball. What this means is you have an amazing eye, and that means you see honestly. You actually see what's in front of your face. Most people do not. Most people, especially visually, they don't really see what's in front of them. You'd be amazed at, when you just ask somebody to draw something that they see, right? It never looks like it because they're not really drawing what they're looking at. Most people say, oh, I can't draw. I can't even draw a stick figure. Everyone can draw to some degree. And the reason that, some people are better or worse, there's different arguments to why, but one of them is definitely practice. If one person can't draw a stick figure, obviously they also haven't been practicing drawing for the last 20 years of their life, right? And they learn to not really see what's in front of them. And there's a lot to that. The other side of drawing is not the seeing. This is my version of a cartoony brain. But is knowing. So there's seeing, right? There's seeing and there's knowing. And I'm spending a lot of time on this one. I have a lot to cover, but it's very important. These two things, this plus this, equals drawing really well, right? And having a great drawing experience. So learn how to see what's in front of you. And what I'm teaching you, hopefully with these videos, is that now there's this other thing to see that you did not see before, which is force. And I'm trying to teach you the knowing. I'm trying to teach you how to do it, right? Like, how do you do it with line? All right, this guy's telling me it's line, thank goodness, right? Otherwise, I could just sit here and I'm going to talk about force. But I'm getting down to the nitty-gritty of there's a specific line even that will help you do it. So seeing and knowing, seeing and knowing, seeing and knowing, right? And you have this relationship between three parts. There's basically your eye, right? There's your mind, your brain. There's my cartoony brain. And your hand, right? And that's the other part of the drawing equation. You have to see it really well. You have to know what you're looking at, and then you have to have practice with your hand to be able to execute what you're telling it to do, right? So there's those three moments, and that is it, I can throw your heart in here, talk about how you feel about it, but I mean, that's coming from your brain, obviously. So seeing, thinking, and feeling, executing. It's those three steps, that you're working yourself through. All right, so my point is, the reason I bring this up is one way that you could actually learn to do this is you're a genius at seeing. You see very clearly, and there's no lying in there. You see it. But most of us don't. So you go to art school or you watch videos like this one to start learning the knowing, and you're learning through knowing. You start to see better, and that's really big. And that's fine. I've done this myself. I didn't really see until I started knowing, and then I started seeing more, and then while I started seeing more, I started learning more, and you kind of bounce back and forth. And in the middle of all that, you're practicing, 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 and your hands get better, and they start doing what you tell them to do. So seeing, you might start seeing form. I showed you an example here, so maybe you'll start seeing it that way. The other thing, though, let's draw on this for a little bit. The other process, the knowing process, is form and perspective and anatomy and all these other things. So I'm going to try to cover in the next, what have I got? I got about 6 minutes here to try and teach you a little bit about form. So, you have a sphere, right? And you have a cube, right? So certain types of line will adhere to the surface of the sphere, and certain types of line will adhere to the surface of the cube, and some won't. So if I start drawing like this, what I want to do, and it's a great exercise, I want to sculpt the sphere. Okay, so I'm just trying to keep lines on its surface. And if you had like a basketball or something, you would see obviously at the seams on the ball, or a baseball, you would see that, you know, the seams are going around the ball, right? Because that's how things work. You know, so here I'm putting these lines and they're staying on the surface of the ball. I'm in essence, I'm sculpting the ball, right? Now, if I drew that same ball and I went like this, these are not adhering to the surface of that ball. If the surface of the ball is smooth, they're not working. The strength of the curvature of those lines does not adhere to the structure of the ball itself, to that sphere. And you can see that. It feels like it's popping off of it. You know, it's like this cube. You know, I can't do this on the cube. Right? The cube has flat surfaces. Why would I be putting curved lines on it? It feels like I'm cutting into the surface. You know, if I wanted to sculpt the cube, you know, I would deal with straight lines. You know, I'm like sculpting. You know, I'm trying to stay on the surfaces, on the planes of the cube. So this is a great exercise. You know, along with the seeing and knowing idea that we've discussed. Where the cube and the sphere, what's really important is understanding perspective. So let's grab something a little thinner here. Alright, so in perspective, I'm going to try to give you my sort of quick run of perspective. This is the fast way to do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's 4-point. 4-point perspective. You know, most books will take you through 1, 2, 3, and 4. I do the same thing actually in my book. I'm going to give you the quick run here because of time. We got 1, 2, 3, and 4. You basically, if you go and you pull lines out of each one of those points. Okay, I'm coming out of point number 1 right now. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not exactly straight, but you'll get the idea. Alright, so that's a 4-point perspective grid. Within that grid, this is how we perceive the world. So, you know, your eyeball, I'll draw this in blue, this basically is your eye. Okay? With your pupil right here. Notice how everything in this grid is like bowing outward, right, towards this center. It's because of the fish-eyedness, right? Like our eye is round, right? So everything is getting closer here, and then everything sort of pinches off to these vanishing points in this perspective grid. This is the horizon line, or some people call it the horizon line, some people call it the eye line. No matter what, you need it, and we're accustomed to seeing one because we're always walking around on the surface of the earth, right? There's always a plane that everything's attached to, which is the ground. So you can fit any box you want in there, okay? And there's all kinds of, you know, rules as to what lines go where, and I'm not really going to have the time to cover that and make this a blown-out perspective class, but I want you to see that I can start pulling boxes out of this grid. I'm going to sort of give you quick tricks here. One of them is, it's not a quick one, perspective, but is definitely to understand perspective. You know, if you learn perspective, you know, you're like halfway home, basically. Force and perspective are probably two biggest things to understand. So you can see, here's different cubes. You know, they're in this 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional space of this 4-point perspective, and they all work, you know. Here, I'll tone the bottoms of these and the tops of these, and you can see that they're living in this structure. So definitely an essential thing to understand is 4-point perspective. A couple of other tricks before we close up when it comes to structure. One is tangent and overlap. So when you're drawing, let's see. when you're drawing, if you do this, and you put one line up to another line, basically that's called a tangent. These two things touch each other. And by that happening, you're basically taking away the opportunity for depth. What you want to do is you want to create overlap. Right? So here and here are these two moments where this line blocks that line. This line blocks that line. And by that occurring, it tells us that this sphere is in front and this one is behind, right? This one is in front, this one's behind because this line blocks this one. It literally is just doing this, right? It's like a T-section, right? And with that T-section occurring, this, whatever this line is describing, whatever structure it's describing, tells you that it goes behind this one because this one stops it. So that's huge. That's a huge idea. You know, like, you know, kids somewhere in like high school start learning about, and you know, some people never learn about it, and that's what makes their drawings flat. So keep in mind overlap, tangents and overlap. And lastly, one of the things that you learn while you're going through perspective is scale. Scale basically creates depth, and we're all aware of that. You know, when you're on the freeway, you're aware that a car off in the distance is smaller than, you know, let's say this is a car, right? Like so. Okay, so now it's a car. There's the headlights, right? And that same car would be really tiny over there in the background, right? So scale gives you space also. I have a quick example I want to show you here. See if I can find it. There we go. Right, so there's some crazy scale. Look at the size of this hand, look at the size of this hand, right? Small hand, big hand. Immediately it feels like this hand is popping out of the page because it's gigantic, right, in comparison to this one. And since there's two of the same element, my mind knows that this one is close to me and this one's far away because your brain has been trained to think so. And I know that your brain has been trained to think so. So as an artist, I take advantage of that, right? So if I go, you know, this is really big and this is really small, look, immediately your brain doesn't think, oh, those are two things on the surface of the paper and one is just drawn larger and smaller. This is further away and this is closer to you, right? It's in perspective. So I'm going to close with that because we're way over time, and I will see you next week for the last Force video installment. Thanks again. Take care.